Welcome everybody. So we're doing a bit of a team talk today. There are 5 of us talking about using babies and young children's perspectives in both research and practice. I'm going to kick off a little bit, starting with some definitions, and then talk to you about kind of how we're going to structure the session. So to start with, what do we mean when we talk about babies and young children's perspectives? Sorry, I should say I'm Sally Hogg. I'm the Policy Fellow in PEDAL. When we talk about babies and young children, we're talking about children right from the start of life. So from birth to age 5 is quite a kind of UK definition of young childhood, and then sort of beyond that up to 7 and 8. And when we talk about their perspectives, we mean their thoughts, their feelings, their lived experiences, what's going on for them and with them. So what they're interested in, how they're experiencing things, how they're making sense of things, their priorities and their values. And we talk about perspectives rather than voices. So this is a sort of a presentation about participation, as it would be particularly called, and about babies and young children's voices. But we talk about perspectives rather than voices because children tell us so much without using words. And we have to start listening potentially before they have an audible voice. And so we feel that perspectives captures that. It captures what children are telling us when they're pre-verbal, when they're non-verbal. And even if they are verbal, they might be telling us a lot more through their behaviours and their wider cues and communications than they're telling us through the words that they have. So when we're talking about listening, tuning into, valuing and using babies and young children's perspectives, we're talking about the whole way in which they're telling us about those perspectives, about what they value, and what we can learn from watching children and observing them. And that might feel to us as adults sometimes a little bit uncomfortable because we have to project things onto that. We are interpreting those behaviours and we're bringing our own perspectives to that. We're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to know what that young little person's trying to tell us. But we can try and we can be curious about it and we can tune in and make the best attempts that we can. So all children have a right to have their voices heard and their views taken into account. That's enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. But we know that when that convention is used and when people cite it, they generally talk about older children. So very often when there is work done on children's voices and children's perspectives and their participation, it's done with older children, it's done with verbal children and young people, and we very often miss babies and young children. And the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child observed this 20 years ago. This is not a new thing for us to be talking about, that actually there is a widespread perception that babies and young children lack that kind of capacity to tell us anything that's interesting, to tell us anything that we should be taking into account, and that they've often been powerless and voiceless and invisible. And yet, as the statement says, children are able to communicate their choices, their feelings, their ideas and wishes in a multitude of ways from the moment they enter the world. And it's up to us to try and listen to those and use those perspectives. So this is an observation from 20 years ago, but still, I'm afraid, very much true. For those of you who watch me on social media, I'm often kind of very vocal and kind of venting when people have listened to children and then there's a room of teenagers and we're really not listening to the smallest people and what they say because it's just a bit harder. So why should we do this? Why does it matter? Firstly, it's a lovely thing to do. It's fantastic to spend time with babies and children, to tune in, to see the world through their eyes and to find the joy in the things they find joy in. We know it's really good for children. We know, we've heard it this morning, that children thrive in attuned relationships where they're valued, where they're given agency. And so those relationships matter with parents and caregivers, but we can also model those when we're doing research, when we're developing services, and give those children that real message that they are valued and valuable and we're listening to them and they've got something useful to be telling us. If we're trying to design services, we've heard quite a lot today about how we can't just kind of take evidence and plonk it in and expect it to work. We have to think about the people we're designing services for the context in which services work. We have to, and very much that's often, again, thought just about in terms of adults, let's understand what parents want. But actually, if we're trying to make change for babies and young children, we have to think about what they want, what they need, how they experience services as well. And we're only going to do that if we tune into their lived experience of what's going on, and they can tell us that. So if we want to link to the kind of why have we put a presentation on perspectives in a day about evidence into practice? Well, actually, tuning into those subjective experiences into children's perspectives is a key tool in helping us to put evidence into practice in ways that's feasible and acceptable and scalable and really going to work for our end users. And then finally, obviously, a reason to do it is that we have rights, and children have rights in international conventions to have their voices heard. And what's often been forgotten is that in England, the UK Childcare Act of 2006 places a statutory duty on local authorities to the early years services have regard to information about the views of children in the early years. So it's actually there in legislation in this country, but very, very often forgotten about. I'd love to hear about local authorities that are developing early years services with the voices of babies and young children being informed of them. But they should be. And so if you want to go out and kind of advocate for this, then there's lots of reasons to do it. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk to you about some research that we have done in PEDAL, where we've really tuned in to babies and young children's perspectives. And then we're going to talk to you about how we've tried to use that expertise and experience that we've developed through that work in research partnerships and in practice as well. So I hope that through these sessions you can understand a little bit more about how we have elicited young children's perspectives. There are many, many ways of doing this, but we'll just give you some examples of stuff we've done. And we'll talk to you about the challenges of doing that and the opportunities of doing it, and some of the value, what we can get from young children that we couldn't get otherwise. I'm going to hand over to Beth and Kelsey first, who's going to talk to you about the research that they've done. And then Stephen and Kuri are going to talk about a particular project in Bangladesh we did with BRAC, which was about finding out the perspectives of young children in diverse communities. And then I'll talk to you about an emergent project we've been doing with Home Start in London, which has been very much a learning project where we're trying to understand as PEDAL, how does our research expertise help in practice, and they're trying to understand as a local charity what more can they do about babies and young children's perspectives. We've got a lot to get through. I hope we will have some time at the end for discussion and questions. If we don't, we're all of us around and would love to talk to you more through the break times and afterwards as well. So I'll hand over to Kelsey and Beth now for the next section.
Thanks, Sal. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Graber. I'm a postdoctoral research associate here at the PEDAL Center, and my work has been really focused in on the role of play in children's health and healthcare environments. I'm not going to delve too much into my own research today, but if anyone is interested in it, I'd really love to talk to you about it. I love talking about it generally. But what I'm going to kick us off and talk about is how we have used children's perspectives in our research and some of the ways that we're hoping that we're trying to bring that evidence base into practice elements. So one of the ways, like Sal was saying, that we might use different techniques to listen to children's voices or their expressions is something called a mosaic approach. Like Sal was saying, children express themselves in many ways before they're verbal or in different ways even when they are verbal. So the mosaic approach developed by Clark and Moss, or rather written about by Clark and Moss, is a framework for listening to and responding to young children by drawing together pieces from different expressive sources to create a more comprehensive picture, or a mosaic, of their perspectives. And this can happen in a variety of ways. So sometimes there's verbal expressions, sometimes there's other techniques that we can use to listen to children and to gather their perspectives. Things like storytelling, drawing, having children do photo elicitation, conducting interviews, or just observing them in their natural contexts and habitats. So as an example of this, I'm going to draw on some research that I did looking at the role of play in hospitals. And I was really trying to understand children's perspectives on play in hospital, not the adult perspective, but how children formulated those experiences and their own conceptualization of what it looked like to play. And the data that comes out of this from doing these different kinds of interviews and playful experiences and drawing with children in this context from a research perspective, can often look like transcripts of things that children say and things that I said as the researcher, or it can look like field notes that come from observations and using those things to try to unpack things that children are telling us. But as part of this session, what I really want to do is have you hear from a child herself. And this is a 5-year-old child who was engaging in some storytelling, a play with small wooden figurines during my study. You won't see her face, but you'll hear her voice, I hope. She's a 5-year-old child, and right from the get-go, you'll hear her talking, or both of us talking about Kelsey. That's not me. We're talking about an elephant, but she gave the elephant my name. But I feel like that's important to qualify before we get started.
All right, well, what's going on with Kelsey? Kelsey is in the hospital. What do you think Kelsey's going to do today?
She's gonna stay here and sleep.
You're going to stay in the hospital and sleep?
And there's some. Did the doctor say?
Hi, Mom. What do I do today?
You have to stay here.
Stay here, but I don't want to stay here.
That's your boy.
Aw,
You have.
but I want to play.
You have to stay sleep.
Okay, I'm awake. Now can I play?
No.
What do I have to do?
Sleep.
Is there anything else besides sleep? Okay, I'll go to sleep.
Wake up.
Ah! What now?
Go to bed.
Again? But I didn't get to play.
Yes. Go now.
Who are you? Who are you?
We are the doctors.
Oh, I have to sleep, doctors?
Yes. What
Okay.
your mom said.
Okay.
Wake up!
Ah! Who are you? Who are you?
These are my kids.
Oh, hi, kids. I've been waiting to see kids all day.
Sleep now.
Who are you? The doctor again?
No, it's a mom.
Oh, Mom, but I want to play with those kids.
No, sleep now.
So I think that was a longer video, but only a minute and a half of quite a long interview that I got to do with that child. And I think what we learned from Junli's talk this morning is that there's probably so many reactions and so many bits and minutia that everyone could pull out of that video. But one thing I just want to draw attention to for the purposes of this talk today is that data like that is so valuable and important. It's not only learning about play, but it's learning through play and the different ways that children choose to express themselves and to think about the things that they want to share. We can learn so much from the different ways that she's perceiving communication, even from a playful extent, in a playful manner, the ways that she's perceiving what it means to be in a hospital, what it means to be cared for, and how that comes across from an adult to a child perspective. And there's a lot that we're doing with that data with colleagues that are here with us today, where we're thinking about how to inform policy of the different people that work in these hospital environments, but also how do we train different healthcare professionals and people who are in training using data that really emanate from children's actual experiences and their actual expressions and voices to inform those things that we're doing with people in real world contexts. And I'm going to hand it over to Beth to talk about some of those other contexts now.
Thank you, Kelsey. That was a lovely video. Okay, so just another quick example before I pass us down the chain of examples. This is a study that some of you might have heard us talk about before. It's our experiences trying to translate evidence to practice in the children's thoughts about school study, which was a piece of research led by Dr. Christine O'Farrelly. And in this study, we interviewed 42 4- and 5-year-olds who were living in an area facing high socioeconomic deprivation in Dublin and Ireland during their first year of school. And we used a variety of tools. We used the mosaic approach, like Kelsey was saying, while chatting to children to allow them to contribute. And among these methods, these included a simple Q&A, like an age-appropriate question and answer session with the children,
an activity where they were asked to give advice to Riley Rabbit, who was a cartoon character, and Riley was just about to start school, and what do we think Riley needs to know about starting school? We used illustrations of everyday school scenarios and heard what children thought about them, what they felt when they looked at them. And we also asked them to draw us a special picture about school and to tell us all about it. So those were the methods we used. As I said, it was with 42 4- and 5-year-olds. We did lots and lots of analysis on it. This is just to give you a very quick flavour of the kinds of things the children were telling us. So when they reflected on what they do at school, this child said, you learn and you get to colour and play and you get to go out into the yard. This little one says, I don't like when we're not going out to yard. That's playground in Irish. When you're going out to yard when it's raining, I would change it for sunny because I like playing in yard. And then this child just said, played, I forget the rest. So obviously that's just a flavour. There was 42 children. Each interview took about an hour. But the thing that I wanted to highlight today was by bringing together all the children's contributions, we were able to develop a school readiness model from the children's perspectives, which I appreciate is probably a bit small, but this was all focused on their data, what they were telling us through these play activities. So at the centre, we've got kind of children's core motivation, their enthusiasm, their sense of self-efficacy, and then you move it out to child-level capacities and skills, and then to environmental factors, which were teachers, friends, family, and the school environment. This is all written up, so if you want to find out more, you can. But what was really nice was we compared this model to common assessments and tools currently used in practice to measure that are commonly being used to measure children's school readiness, and we identified overlap between the children's model, or what we had interpreted from the children's perspectives, and saw where there were overlap but also disparities in what was being measured. Unsurprisingly, play was a key thing that was not being measured as much. But just to end on this example, the thing that I think is key to highlight is the real challenge for us was getting these findings out there. It seemed, as researchers, it seemed like this had really transferable lessons for practice. But of course, we were writing it up into an academic paper, and we didn't want it to just sit there. We knew that it was more relevant to practitioners than it was to other researchers. So we made some efforts once we were done to try and get it out there further. So we wrote a magazine article for Nursery World, which has quite good nursery and school readership. We created an animation to go out on social media. We just recently wrote a book chapter, which is the book that Paul plugged at the beginning of the conference today. So we have a little chapter in there. We've mostly been doing things like this, going out, doing talks. We've done one-on-one chats to specific organisations, and that seems to be quite a tangible way of building bridges and finding kind of commonalities in our work for this. And we also wrote a policy brief for key stakeholders. But I think were we to go back, we would be working to a plan from the beginning and working in partnership with people who do this stuff on the ground every day. But it's just to give you a bit of an example of the extra things that we can do to translate to practice. And now I will hand over to Stephen. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Beth. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stephen Bayley, and I'm part of the Pedal team. And I'm going to be talking with to you with Kuri Chisim from BRAC about the My Play Life, a Qualitative Study of Children's Play in Bangladesh project. And there are loads of people involved in this project, and here you can see on screen lots of them. And I'd like to give a particular shout out to Poma and Hamida, who were meant to be with us today in person, but sadly couldn't join. This work has been taking place over the past year, but it actually builds on a much longer collaboration between Pedal and BRAC. And this goes back to some initial work done by the late David Whitebread, whom you can see in these photos here during a couple of his visits. And as you've heard from Sal, Kelsey, Beth, Pedal has built up a wealth of expertise over the years in using more child-centred approaches using play as a tool for understanding children's experiences. But we were conscious that many of these approaches had primarily been used in the UK, in Ireland, in higher income contexts, and so we wanted to explore trialling them, testing them out in another more global setting. And so this led to the My Play Life project. And so with funding from the Lego Foundation, we have embarked on this project over the past year to use qualitative methods to understand children's experiences and perspectives, and in particular to answer these two related questions. So what does play mean for Bangladeshi children, and what does play look like? So speaking to our BRAC colleagues in the early days, it was really clear that there were a couple of other components that they were keen to include in the research as well. The first is that they described the very real effects of climate change in Bangladeshi children's lives. So floods in some locations, extreme heat, droughts, other extreme climate patterns around the country. And the second thing was they talked about the ongoing humanitarian crisis with particularly the Rohingya refugees around the Cox's Bazar area in the south of the country. So as a result of these conversations and initial discussions, we decided that the research would focus on 4 areas around the country, each affected by different climatic or humanitarian factors. So you can see the 4 different settings there. And in each community, we've worked with about 10 or so children, aged 1 to 7, and using a wide range of methods, again drawing on the mosaic approach that Kelsey and Beth have talked about. And these have included children's interviews with children, observations, crafting, drawing activities, and also story stems, which I think Kuri will talk a little bit about. So I'm now going to hand over to Kuri, and she's going to share the experience and also some reflections from using this child-centered, play-based approach and how children's perspectives are feeding into the work that they're continuing to do in Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, and hello, everyone. So through this research, we wanted to find out that what are the ways that we can explore children's perspective, especially when we think about really small children and young children. We really do not see much researches around this. So this was our opportunity to look at it and how they look at the world and how they interact, and then play came in as an important and integral part of it. So Stefan has already mentioned about the 4 areas that we have selected. Here you can see the visual representation of these 4 areas, how each of these areas actually looks like. This one is the Rohingya Camp, and then there's Naga, which is drought prone, and then it has kind of groundwater depletion, and then there's Hobbiganj. Hobbiganj is actually beautiful. It has tea gardens, lush green, but then again there's heavy rainfall. And then there's Maniganj, which is at the Padma River, and it is prone to river erosion. So these are the 4 areas that we actually choose. And then while deciding how our research would look like, we selected 36 children of different age cohort from in these 4 areas, and they were selected based on mix of age and the gender and children's and families' willingness to participate and interact with us. And then the data collectors were recruited from the local community, because these local communities' data collectors were well trusted, and then people understood, and they understood the culture of the community. And then all of them actually received psychosocial training, because they would be dealing with the children who, some of them were going through trauma, especially in the humanitarian context, and some of the children were also facing the effects of climate change. And also these are the data collectors who will be dealing with the families who are going through a lot in some cases. So we made sure that they are well trained and they have received training in providing basic psychosocial skills. And also they were trained in diverse research methodologies, and there were 1 senior data collector with previous experience on play and psychosocial support designated to oversight and support each of these areas. These I've already covered. And then what sort of challenges we have actually faced when we were working with children. So first one is that we know that their attention span is shorter, and then the communication style of the children varies. In most of the cases, they would not give us descriptive answers. They would probably just give yes, no, or very short and brief answers to the questions. So data collectors had to be lots of rapport with them, play a lot, just to understand that what they're thinking and what are the things that they wanted to say. And then there are cultural and social norms. So sometimes children were hesitant to talk about their experiences, and they were also thinking that whether this is something whether I should talk about or not. Although they're small children, they understood those nuances. So that is something that the data collectors had to kind of like unpack. And there are power dynamics and adult influences. Children are very smart and they knew what sort of answers adults want to hear. So sometimes they were just giving those kind of answers. So, but then again, with time, the data collectors built a relationship with children and then the families, and then the children sort of trusted the data collectors with the responses, the real answers. And then sensitivity to context and vulnerability, because we were working with Rohingya children whose parents, the Rohingya children who we are currently working with, they did not see the influx because they're below 6 years old, but then again their parents have seen it. So they already have this trauma, and then of course trauma is often intergenerational. So what we did is sort of, we made sure that whenever data collectors are interacting with them, they're sensitive, and then they understood the context and vulnerability. And then there's time constraint and logistical challenges, meaning that whenever the data collectors are going to the homes, they have to actually have an understanding with the families, and then they were going there, keeping children's timing in mind whenever the children were ready to talk to, or whatever routine works for them. So these were some of the challenges we faced and the data collectors faced, but we were sort of navigating around them. And then here are some of our primary findings. The first one is that integration of natural play and everyday materials into play. We saw that children do play a lot with natural materials. They do not really need lots of toys or expensive toys. And then they had access to open space and physical play, and spatial exploration was evidential in each and every places where we saw. But then again, in the Rohingya context, the areas are really narrow, but then again, children were playing in those narrow ways. They were running around and then, going up and down into the staircases. And then there were interaction with other children, and animals are key in building diverse skills. We saw children bonding with the animals, and most of them had domesticated animals at their house, and then they loved playing with them, and they took care of their animal as if the way their mothers take care of them, sort of. And then the representation of traditional practice and rituals in children's play. We saw that there's a lot of things that they see around them, and then those representations are there. For example, in Noga, we saw that people particularly do intrinsic drawing, which is called alpona, and children would like to do that or mimic that in their play. So this kind of representation was there. And then there's impact of changing trends and use of technology on children's play pattern. For example, we saw them watching a lot of cartoon, and then parents were okay with it to some extent, and then they were also providing mobile phones to them so that they can watch cartoons. And parents mostly show positive attitude towards children's play and children's adaptation with changing weather and climate difficulties in their play practices. So we saw that the areas where there's so much heat is there, and then children would usually during that time play indoors, not outdoors. And whenever there's flood going on, children would also play indoors. And then in some of the villages, we saw there's presence of large tree which have shade. Children would actually play around that tree. So that was their playground. So this is a way of how children adopted the changing weather and climate difficulties in their play practices. So here are some of the pictures you can see. And then children, how they're using natural elements to do their day-to-day play. Here are more pictures from Manikganj. She's playing cooking. She has her own stove made out of clay. So This one, you see that they had this room which they made, and they said that they're playing disco club, dance club or something. Yeah. And adults were not allowed to enter. And then here's a picture of Minhaj, who's a 5-year-old, and he had all these goats, and he was taking care of these goats. He was in charge of feeding them, taking them into the bath. And doing the drawing and arts workshop, here's a 6-year-old Maria who drew this picture, and then she actually told our data collector elaborately what this drawing is about. And it shows herself and her friend, and then the garden that surrounds them. And then here's a story time session of 6-year-old Ibrahim. And then if you look at the conversation, you will see that how our data collector sort of helps to navigate, and then tries to play with the child, and then tries to bring out the data and the aspect of this child. And then there are emerging insights and shifting perspectives on children's play. So the first one is that what we understood is children as capable and insightful research participants, because often we consider they are not. But we understood that they are actually, but we do have to use the right tool for that. And then the transformative power of play-based research methods. We have to make sure that in order to bring children's voices, we have to make sure that these play-based research methods are being used in places. And only then we can understand their voices. And then the importance of contextualization and adaptation, because we have story STEM, which is beautifully designed, but then again, we have to contextualize it for our country, for our context, the kind of play children does, and also we have to contextualize a little more for the Rohingya community. So we must do that. And then the value of reflexive practices, we have to ensure that we are actually addressing that. And then a path forward implication for research and practice is that we have to prioritize child-centered research, and we have to expand the toolkit of innovative play-based methods, informing evidence-based action, and cultivating a culture of listening. And last but not least, I want to end by saying that together, let's unlock the wisdom and wonder of young children's voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuri, that was lovely. So I'm just going to talk now about a UK-based project, which is, unlike everything else we talked about, is not a research project, but it's about trying to think about how do we use some of those insights from doing this research in practice. So for those of you who don't know, Home Start is a charity that exists around the world, but there are about 180 branches in the UK, all of which are slightly different in how they operate, but generally work around having a network of trained volunteers who provide support to families with young children. I was doing a presentation in London a couple of years ago where we hadn't actually been listening to young children, but we were phrasing a lot of the insights about children's mental health in the voices of young children in order to kind of keep a central focus on them rather than always talking from an adult point of view. And I mentioned that we did work with young children, and somebody from Home Start came up to me and said they were really keen to do more with babies and young children's perspectives in their local service, and could we help them with that? We were really keen at that point to think about, well, was our experience from research useful in practice, and if so, how? So it was a learning project from both sides. For those of you who aren't from the UK or don't know, Richmond, Kingston, Hounslow, 3 boroughs in West London. And this Home Start service, like others, has volunteers who work with families over a number of months, families with children under 5, who go in and provide responsive support to the family in the home. They also run sort of stay and play groups for parents and toddlers. So Home Start, we're keen to find out more about babies and young children's perspectives in order to improve the quality and impact of the work they were doing with young children. They were also reported that increasingly in the local authority and from local funders there was this pressure to bring children's voices into evaluation, into funding proposals, to show that service users were involved. But people didn't really understand what that looked like for babies and young children, and so they felt they were being disadvantaged against other local charities who work with more verbal older children, who were more able to bring those children's voices into funding applications or into kind of local consultations. So that was another dynamic of this. So the project kind of had two parts. Our input was quite limited, but what we did was we sort of kicked off the project by the team you've heard talking today, providing at first an online workshop for a small group of the Home Start volunteers and staff, where we talked about what we've talked about today, the value of children, young people's, babies and young children's perspectives, about our mosaic approach. And we also brought in a wonderful clinical psychologist called Hannah Gudzinska, who specialises in work with young children and who could talk about babies' cues and communications and how to observe very young children and to interpret what they were saying. We then went face-to-face to this work with the same group, and we did a co-design workshop thinking about what specifically could they change within their resources or processes or ways of working in the service to better embed babies and young children's perspectives in their work. And that was, we were really clear, we didn't understand their service, they were the experts in that, and that they were already actually doing quite a lot. So we used this model of what works well, and then it would be even better if. So what were they currently doing? And we broke down kind of every stage of, from when they got a referral about a family, when they first met the family, through a home visit, how they evaluated it, where did they currently think about babies and young children's perspectives. Sometimes that was maybe some volunteers did stuff but it wasn't universal, or there was bits of good practice, or maybe they weren't doing anything. And then they said the even better is if was how could we build on what was there, how could we scale up good stuff, or what more could they do. And then at the end of that workshop we had generated an enormous number of ideas, and we prioritised a few, but we very much said to the group, you can just go away and do stuff. We're going to prioritise a few things for the branch to work together on collectively, but a lot of the volunteers were leaving the room thinking, I could just do a little bit more of this for these families, I didn't need to wait. And then as a team, we've just provided a bit of kind of an ongoing critical friend role to the team as they've taken on this project, where we have monthly phone calls just to talk through what they're doing and maybe provide a few ideas and suggestions. But we've basically now handed it over, and the Home Start staff and volunteers are co-designing, testing, and iterating some of the ideas that they've got. So what they're thinking of, their kind of priorities, is they've developed a prompt card for volunteers, which is probably a bit, this is a sort of draft here. They've developed this idea of care, so think about cues, be aware and curious, reflect on the child and their emotions and needs, and engage in play and connection with the child. So that is a prompt for volunteers just to think about when they're going out on a visit. And that is also going to be incorporated into the training for volunteers in due course. They have a diary sheet that volunteers complete after they've spent time with the family, and they've just included a couple of prompts on that for volunteers to add in, how was the child today, what did you do, what might you do next time, around their perspectives. And then they've reflected that as well in questions for the supervision, so when that volunteer then goes and talks to the supervisor, they then again reinforce kind of being curious about the child. We recommended that they did a sort of rapid cycle design and testing type approach, which basically means they just come up with some ideas, don't try and make them perfect, give them a go, come back and think, did that work, was it helpful, how could we make it better? So that's the stage they're currently in. They've got a small group of volunteers who are trying some of this stuff out and coming back together and thinking about it. And then the plan is, once they've got something they feel is about right, that they'll scale that up across the branch. But one of the positive outcomes as well is that they already say that actually as a result just of going through this process, although none of this has been implemented yet, they've found that they are just talking about babies and young children more, that actually where conversations might previously have very much focused on parents' needs and parents' experiences, the little people are getting a bit more airtime as well. So we're seeing that. And we have identified some lessons from this project, which we are writing up into a paper which we think is sort of transferable for anybody wanting to think about doing more work on babies and young children's perspectives. The slides will be available afterwards, and this paper writing up is also going to be available soon for those of you trying to take photos very rapidly. So one of the things was that the most important thing we thought we could do was change people's mindset rather than teach the method. So as we said, there's lots of methods for getting babies and young children's perspectives, but they're not really rocket science. And also what method is right depends very much on the age, the developmental need of the child, the situation, the opportunity. Sometimes you don't need a method, it's just about watching a baby, observing them, being curious. So what we wanted to leave the volunteers with more than anything was a mindset where they were thinking about, what is this little person telling me? Or how can I find out more about that? And that feels more sustainable than trying to teach them the technique, which some might use and some might not. It's also very key to Home Start's model. It's a very, very flexible model, very much led by volunteers and the families they're working with in the context they're in. So a one-size-fits-all, a kind of go in and do this with a child is just not really right in that situation. Linked to that, the co-production element of this project was really important. So much came out when we were talking about what people already did, the strengths they could already build on, the things they were worried about, their culture, their values. That was all really important in thinking about what were the solutions that would fit for them. So although actually some of the things, like actually changing something on the diary sheet, was something that we thought about right from the start might be an obvious win, it was really important they got to that themselves, because there is that kind of reticence. People feel busy, they don't want to be told to do more. You know, we're researchers, they're volunteers, they don't think we necessarily understand what they're doing. So for them, that element of guiding people through finding solutions that work for them was really important. Not assuming shared knowledge, values and principles is important. This was a small group of self-selected volunteers in a service that had asked us to come and work with them. But when we really dug into talking about children's perspectives, we still raised some quite fundamental questions. People saying, well, actually, I don't think it is my job to work with a child. My job is to support the parent, and then that will have some knock-on consequences for the child. So whether the child is in a direct recipient of the service was kind of quite a fundamental issue. But actually people, when we dug into it, had different ideas about that in the room. And also different, although all these people were incredibly dedicated, skilled volunteers who cared deeply about children, some of them had what I would perceive as quite antiquated views around children's perspectives. So we gave an example where, a theoretical example, a volunteer is trying to talk to a parent, but the baby is kind of squirming and very expressive and getting in the way, and the conversation between the volunteer and the parent is hard. If they tune into that baby's experience and maybe think, oh, they're really a bit bored and a bit uncomfortable, so maybe I should give them some toys, the baby will settle, and then the conversation with the parent will be easier. So actually, even if you think it's just a parent service, by tuning into that baby's needs and meeting them, you've made that delivery of that service easier. That was a theoretical example we gave. One volunteer said, I don't really agree with that. I think children should learn from a really young age that they need, they don't come first in these conversations. So you think, gosh, there's some quite big views that we need to get out, we need to talk about, people need to be comfortable saying, and we need to say, well, why do you think that, and is that right, and do children learn? It's that kind of old, some of the parent views, the rod for your own back if you see them, or actually are we creating more independence? So let's have a discussion. So it's really important to dig into and have space to talk about and reflect on those views, and for people to be safe talking about them, because actually if you don't discuss these, you're not going to get that fundamental change in babies' needs being met. The final thing to say is this can be really emotionally difficult work, and we underestimated this. If we were doing it again, we would create more space and time to talk about the difficulty of this. So talking about babies and young children's perspectives is difficult in lots of ways. Some people's own needs were not met as babies, and it brings difficult personal experiences. Some people have regrets of the way they parented or the way they have volunteered and worked with families in the past. For some people, just hearing about stories of babies' needs not being met, we talked about babies who maybe stopped crying as much because their cries weren't unheard, and some people that was incredibly difficult to talk about and really hard. So acknowledging that, finding space, and I think preempting it, preparing people for the fact it might be difficult. I think we went in thinking this is all great stuff to be doing, and we didn't spend enough time preparing people for the fact that it might raise some difficult feelings and creating space for that. So we did deal with that, I think, very well afterwards, but we wish we'd done more in advance. So those are all things that I think are sort of useful messages to think about if you're interested in doing this sort of work in your own service. It's very rewarding. It doesn't take a lot of kind of resource, or it's that resourcefulness that Jenny was talking about this morning. There's lots of things we can do. We just need to be quite sensitive about how we do it and how we take people on that journey to make it really meaningful. I think we've run out of time, I'm afraid. It is break time now, so we could, if you're desperate to go out and grab a coffee or cake or go to the loo, then please do go. But if you're happy to eat into your break time by 5 minutes, then please do ask any questions of any of us if you've got any.